Alright, now that we got some experience building formulas using cell references, in this video I will be discussing the different types of cell references and explain how they change when you copy a formula to a different cell. I'm going to clear out some cells here to give us a little bit more room to work, and all I'm doing is selecting the cells I want to delete and pressing the delete key on my keyboard. Alright, now that we got some space, I'm going to be talking about two different types of cell references. The first one is a relative reference. And what I mean by relative is that when you have cell references within your formula and you copy this formula to a different cell, the cell references will change based on the relative position of rows and columns. For example, in our January column, we have a formula at the bottom to give us the total of all the expenses, B4 plus B5, B6, and so on. So instead of doing the whole process of going into cell, typing the equal sign, and choosing the cells that we want to sum together, what we could do is actually grab the cell that we only had to type in the formula once and copy this formula to the cells that we want totals in. So what we're going to do is copy the formula that's in cell B9 by pressing Ctrl C or Command C if you're on Mac, and then click the cell that we want to paste our formula into and click Ctrl V or Command V if you're on Mac. Now if you pay really close attention, right now in cell B9 we have cells B4 plus B5 plus B6, B7, B8. And when we paste it to cell C9, so we're changing a column, we're moving one column to the right. I'm going to press Ctrl V. Now if you look in our formula, we have cells C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8. So once again, cell B9, all of our cell references have B, and cell C9, all of our cell references have C, while keeping the row numbers the same. Same thing goes for March. I'm going to click in the March column and click Ctrl V to paste our formula, and right now we're still copying from cell B9 and we moved over 2 columns. So all of our cell references went from B4, B5 to B6 to D4, D5, D6 since we copied over the formula 2 columns. And since we didn't go down any rows, all of our row numbers stayed the same. So let's kind of do the same process for our totals in the very right column. So if we click in cell E4 that has our formula in it, and instead of copying, pasting the formula into each cell individually, all we have to do is click in the cell and move your cursor to the bottom right hand corner of the cell until your cursor turns into a thin black cross. And from one of the previous videos, we know this is called the fill handle, and we can use this fill handle to copy formulas down rows or across columns. And before we copy this formula down, I want you to think about how these cell references are going to change. Right now we have B4 plus C4 plus D4. And now that we're copying down rows, what do you think is going to happen to the row numbers? So let's find out. We're going to click and drag all the way down. And then now if we click in the cells, we went from B4 to C4 to D4. And if we go down a cell, it goes B5, C5, D5. And once again, B6, C6, D6. So now that we are copying the formulas down the rows, the row numbers are changing. And since we stayed in the same column, our columns are staying consistent. Okay, so that was relative referencing, and you could tell that when we copied formulas across columns or down rows, the cell references within the formulas would change relative to their position. Now the next type of reference that we're going to be discussing is called an absolute reference. And we're going to have to expand our report a little bit to give a proper example of how absolute references work. So let's go ahead and add a new column to our report, and we're going to call it % of total. And our goal here is to get the percentage of each type of expense in regards to the total amount of expenses we paid for the past 3 months. So what we need to do is create a formula to get the percentage, and then we can copy that formula down our % of total column. So to start off, we got to type in the equal sign, and then we're going to take cell E4, which is the total of cost of goods sold, divided by the total amount of expenses that we had to pay for all 3 months, which is cell E9. And we're going to click enter. So you can tell that the total expenses of cost of goods sold was 38% of the total amount of all expenses combined. Now if we click in this cell and we want to copy this formula down to the rest of the rows, we're going to grab our fill handle and we're going to drag it down to the rest of our expenses. We're going to let go, see what happens. Oh, alright, so obviously we have some errors in our formula, so let's go back to our formula and kind of see what is happening. So if we click in the formula bar, we can see that we have E4 divided by E9, which is great. All right, then we're going to move down a cell, See what's happening here. Now we have E5, which is correct, divided by E10. So the cell reference actually moved down a row. So this cell is actually blank. And when you divide a number by 0, it's going to give you an error. So we want cell E9 to be constant. And that's what an absolute reference is that your cell references will remain constant regardless if you copy your formula down rows or across columns. So let's exit out of this and go back to our formula. And then we're going to go up to our formula bar. And to change cell E9 to an absolute reference, we have to put $signs before E and before 9. So when you see $E, $9, that means that is not going to change. Or you can use a shortcut by clicking F4 on your keyboard, and you can cycle through the different references. So if there's no $signs, that means it's relative. If there's both $signs, that means the column and the row number are going to stay constant. So we can click enter. Now our first one still looks correct. Now if we drag down this formula through the rest of our expenses, we should be getting the correct percentages. And from the start, so it's E4 divided by E9. Then if we go down one row, we should see E5 divided by E9. And if we go down one more, it's E6 divided by E9. So the first part of our equation is relative because we want to take each expense and then divide it by the total. And then after the division sign, the total amount, cell E9, stays constant. And that's a absolute reference.